HR organizations have been built to administer things. They administer hiring, they administer salary and promotion processes. They have never been hired, trained, and thought of as transformational people. For some reason, it's incestuous. The way you get to be at the top of an HR is you've run a couple of the administrative functions inside of HR already.
Welcome to Voice Activated, the podcast dedicated to unlocking the power of employee feedback. I'm Sean Fitzpatrick, founder of TalentMap and your host. In each episode, we'll dive into real-world examples and best practices, as well as some lessons learned from employee surveys, pulse checks, focus groups, 360s, and more. If people are at the heart of your business, you're in the right place. Expect open conversations, practical advice, inspiring stories from companies that are getting it right, and some reflections from those who've hit a few bumps along the way. Tune in, listen up, and let's activate the voice of your employees. Bruce Temkin is a pioneer in the field of experience management and a longtime advocate of putting people in the center of leadership. He founded the Temkin Group. He led EX Institute at Qualtrics and helped really shape the customer and employee experience. In fact, he's often known as the Godfather of customer experience measurement and management. Today, he's the Chief Humanity Catalyst at Temkinsight and a host of the podcast Humanity at Scale, where he challenges leaders to put meaning before measurement and scale empathy without losing integrity. Bruce is a true visionary of the human experience management. In this episode, we'll talk about what it really means to lead with humanity, explore the concepts of experience management, and drill down into ways leaders can create a more human-centered experience for the people that they lead. Bruce, welcome to Voice Activated.
Thanks.
What I'd like to know a little bit is really understand the evolution and philosophy of experience management. I've heard you sometimes been called the Godfather of customer experience, and I'd really like to know how that journey has evolved. How did you end up here? How did you become known as the Godfather?
There's a long story. It started at birth. No, I'm just kidding you. I'll answer the second question about why some people sort of called me the Godfather of customer experience. So there was this world of people who were looking at things that you might think about as customer experience today. There were like data and market researchers, there were website designers, and when I was at Forrester Research, and I came from a strategy and operations background and found myself in the space of really looking at companies, how they're interacting with their customers. And so what I ended up doing is pulling in all those domains, right? I looked at what was going on in the data. I looked at what was going on in the design and user experience, and then I brought with that my understanding of strategy and operational design. And so what I ended up doing is taking what was a bunch of dispersed activities and starting to frame an enterprise approach that used all those capabilities and skills that started to be called customer experience. Not that the terms weren't used before, but all those domains together started to come. And so I think that's having brought all that together and defined a lot of the models. I think I did the first competency models around customer experience and all that. Did the first model of voice of the customer programs. I ended up with that term being called the Godfather.
Interesting, because it certainly caught on and is now used and talked about worldwide. So that's quite interesting. How about when you think about it relative to the employee side or the workplace side? So what does experience management sort of mean in the context of the workplace?
Yeah, so to me, it's there's sort of a false dichotomy between what does experience management mean for customers and employees? To me, there's an ecosystem of stakeholders that all have to be understood and served to be able to achieve the goals of any organization, right? So that's how I look at it. Employees I would argue, are probably more important than customers. Like, if I have to think about a model, I think we if we understand our employees and work with our employees, then we're more likely to get customers, as opposed to if we don't understand our employees and recognize what the needs are and we go after customers, that's not sustainable. So if you look at the evolution, though, of where these practices came, and when I first defined customer experience in my model way back in Temkin Group, it included employees. So employee listening and employee experience was a part of what I call the customer experience. Now, having said that, if we just think about the evolution, customer experience, if a broad evolution, used to be every year and a half, you did a customer satisfaction survey, right? That evolved to being more ongoing with voice of customer programs, and then layering on more and more action taken based on the insights you're getting. That's sort of like the evolution. Employee experience has sort of been in that same evolution, but behind it.
Did it start later? Or is it, when you say behind it, or?
So they all started the same thing. Like, people were doing employee studies every year and a half, the same way you do in customers. But the voice of the customer movement, and I think like a big thing like NPS created a surge of activity around customers. There wasn't that surge around employees, and what I found was HR organizations were way slower to change than the customer-facing organizations, right? So they're on the same trajectory, right? We're now trying to understand how do we listen to employees more often, more frequently, and get deeper things. I don't think on the employee side there's done enough around how do we take action based on understandings we have about our employees, or even how do we think about listening to our employees as signals for what's going on in the broader world that we need to take strategic action on, never mind just workplace action on.
Well, I want to push down on that a little bit. Why do you think HR departments are slower, have been slower in taking up some of these initiatives? Because if you mirror the voice of the customer, you would think then we'd be much further along in that space than we're maybe at right now.
Yeah, I think there's a structural element to HR organizations. HR organizations have been built to administer things, right? They administer hiring, they administer salary and promotion processes. They administer. They have never been hired, trained, and thought of as transformational people. So I remember back in 2012, I did a study of HR executives for the sole purpose of trying to get data from them, which showed that they weren't focused on transformation, for the whole purpose of trying to push them to think of it. Because I wanted HR leaders to go, you can be more valuable in your organization. You should be strategic. You need to think about these tools as a platform for having a bigger voice in the strategy and direction of the organization. But that takes a long time, because the people who are getting promoted into HR have all sort of evolved through these administrative functions, right? They take one, and so you haven't, until recently, I will say, I'm starting to see it. You haven't seen like heads of HR coming from transformational roles like you would on the customer side. You bring someone who's transformed someone else and we're in customer. But in HR, for some reason, it's incestuous, right? The way you get to be at the top of an HR is you've run a couple of the administrative functions inside of HR already. Not that you've transformed. You don't see like leading operations executives going to take over an HR department, or yeah. And I think that's what the problem, that I won't say it's a problem, but that's what I will say has been the roadblock to the transformation we've seen on the customer side.
So part of it is structural. Like, they don't have necessarily the skills or the capabilities yet, or they're not, sort of the mindset really isn't quite there, or the way maybe the customer side and the marketing side has sort of come from more in the business concepts where, and that's what I noticed too. A lot of human resource professionals we deal with, they typically don't have a business background or an MBA background, but when you're dealing with the customer and the marketing side, that type of profile is much more prevalent. So that mindset is often very much there. Is there things that you think HR could do now to have or is there a framework or some sort of key elements of employee experience and human experience that they could use to start to build that credibility? Because if they just went to the C-suite and said, "Oh, we want to start implementing this ongoing listening program and mirror what we're doing on the customer side," they might not get that credibility to get the buy-in for all of these things. Are there things that you think they could do now or start to do, or what are stepping stones if they're doing a survey every 2 years now or every 18 months? How do you what's the first step you've seen work or suggest that might work?
Yeah, so I think the trigger point for me are leaders. It's really hard for an organization to listen and take action on all the employees and decipher it. I mean, I think you need to do some of that. But to me, the point is, how do we create the leaders that we need and want for the future by understanding information from them, but also understanding the information from the people around them, right? How can we learn from employees which are the factors that make our leaders better? Who are the better leaders? How can we mirror leadership, right? Because at the end of the day, I think we drive the organization and it's mostly middle managers, right? Like it's not the CEO and the CEO's direct reports. They're a different beast, right? They're not operating the day-to-day, but if we look in the middle of the organization, what is our leadership model? What type of information and data and feedback are we getting from the organizations about what leaders are doing well, what they're not doing well? How do we actually use that in a closed loop way to make sure that we're creating the best, most powerful group of leaders to lead us forward? And for most organizations, it's lead us forward in a world of uncertainty and complexity, right? And so to me, the opportunity is we have to say and this happened on CX. I always talked about CX. You're not in charge of the customer experience. You're in charge of transforming the organization to be better at delivering customer experience. Same thing on the employee side. It's not about employee experience. It's about you are transforming the organization towards a future state where it can be better positioned to succeed. And that success comes from having the leaders prepared and able to deal with whatever we see in the future. And like I said, for most of us, but most organizations, it's a future of uncertainty and complexity.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's often when we're talking to organizations around engagement, they go, "Well, what can we do to better engage our teams or engage our staff?" And often we guide them as well. You can't really force them to be engaged. All you can do is create the environment in which they can be engaged, or they're more likely to be engaged. And that environment are levers you can pull as a manager or as a leader. So very similar in terms of messaging. We go there. One of the things you talked about, the importance of middle management. Now, middle management is in a very difficult position. They sort of get it from both ends. They get it, from the C-suite, pushing everything down. Let's get these, leadership, enhance their behaviors, enhance their competencies. They also get it from, their direct reports. What's going on? How do I do my job better? So-and-so's not showing up for their shift and all the operational stuff that they do. So, and the work you're doing, I've subscribed to your podcast, and I really find it interesting because you're thinking about it in a somewhat different way. You're thinking about how do you, sort of get the idea of human experience. So it's not just customer, it's not employee, but at scale. And it's different if you're one-to-one with a person. Some managers are good, some are not so good. There's a lot of them in the middle that could probably become really good managers or leaders, but they're not there yet. How do you get beyond sort of that one-to-one and get it more at a scale environment in that middle management role in mid to large organizations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. I think, first of all, people do what's measured, incented, and celebrated, right? Like at the end of the day. So I always think, well, one of the things I always say is like if you look at people and they're doing the wrong things, I love the quote, "Don't blame the player, blame the game." Right? So what's the game we're creating with measurements, incentives, and celebrations, right? And so that's where I would hit first, right? If we know what type of leaders we want to have, how do we measure that? Then how do we incent it? And incentives don't have to be like monetary, right? There are other incentives like well, the an incentive can be a note from the CEO saying, "Thank you, you've done a great job, and here's the activity that you did that is supportive of the values that we care about."
It's like creating that culture, not just, like one of your guests recently talked about rituals, having this sort of process of constant methods that it may not cost money but it might have a little bit of 10, 15 minutes of someone's time. So that type of thing is what you're referring to as an example.
Absolutely, absolutely. So once you have like the system in place that's encouraging the behaviors you want, then you have to help the people, help those leaders create rituals. Rituals are great, right? Because if you don't do the little things over and over again, then they don't stick. And also, you need to teach people some things, and you talk about what I try to do on my podcast and with things I write. One of the things I try to do is let's start by helping not just leaders, but my podcast is certainly focused on leaders, but let's help everyone understand what makes people tick, right? And one of the podcast, one of the episodes that I loved was with Kurt Gray, who talked about sort of he's wrote a book, Outraged, right? And the idea there is let's look at why people think that other people are morally void, right? The left to the right. And it turns out that people are all responding exactly the same. We're exactly the same. We are doing things to keep us from being hurt. We're all just trying to stay safe. Now, what we see as being risks to that safety are different. And that's why we behave and act in ways that seem in opposition. But at the end of the day, we're all just trying to stay safe. So understanding things like that about what drives people also helps leaders better understand the employees they're dealing with and the people around them. And so that's one of my goals, right? Is if even at a base level, if I could teach people to think about other people in a different way, in a way that helps them better understand what they can do to drive performance if you're a manager, or drive alignment, I think that's what I can do at scale.
Can you think of an example of how, like, if you thought about a manager, like an example if you can make this real for them, right? Like, what's an example of someone teaching, on that? How do you teach somebody to have that type of empathy or that type of outlook of putting themselves in someone else's shoes?
Yeah, so if you combine those two things, right? We talk about rituals, and combined thinking, and so another element when I think about rituals is and it comes from the area of psychology, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy it's usually used to help people fix problems, but what it really means is can you mentally see yourself doing something, catch it, and have another reaction to it? You name it, you see it, you name it, and you do something about it, right? So going back to what can we do? Well, one of the things we could do is teach leaders that if you are in an environment where you feel like you want to tell someone what they need to do, ask yourself, do you really need to tell them what they need to do? Can you ask them what they think they should be doing? Right? Little things like that, because what happens is we try to teach people. There are some people, and there'll be a bunch of people who will act like they have no idea what to do. Employees, like they're stuck, they're lost. And it's not that they're stuck or lost, it's that they don't feel empowered to share their opinion about what should happen. So if you know that about people, they don't feel safe, right? So if you're a leader and your natural response is, okay, let's do this, right? Catch yourself. It's sort of a ritual. If I'm about to tell someone what to do, let me step back and say, what do you think we should do? And that's the type of thing that can empower. And oh, by the way, little things like recognizing that people like to be able to share their successes, right? Making people proud. So this is something I do with I have a mentorship I do in waves, groups of mentees. We start every meeting with share the thing, one or two things that you're most proud of achieving since our last meeting. Giving people airtime to share the things that they're proud of is an amazing way to engage them, right? Because we're getting them to feel good about the work that they're doing, and so there's lots of little things like that, that if you understand people and you can create a ritual around, that you can have a powerful impact.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really around teaching leaders or managers. Don't always be prescriptive all the time, or don't always tell people the answer. Even if you might know it or think you know, it's really get them to bring it out of them by just asking and listening. So that power of listening. There's Edgar Schein. You probably know him, a professor. He wrote an excellent book called Humble Inquiry, and it's all about leadership and how to go and approach it from I don't know the answer. I'm not even going to assume the answer with my team. I'm going to get them to suggest ideas and suggest, as opposed to going in with, I know what the answer. I'm going to direct the pre-meeting before the meeting. I'm going to direct them what we're going to get out of, and I'm going to even have a meeting ahead of time to make sure it happens. And it's sort of changing that mindset. So teaching managers and leaders is what you're talking about. Just that's one way to think about it. It's not a difficult thing, but you do have to catch yourself, right? When you're maybe doing it, okay, I got to make sure I take the time to ask the question. So I like that as a very practical thing, something can do. Just speaking of that mentorship program I'm part of we use the EOS operating system. And at the beginning of every meeting, we do the same thing. We ask, share since the last week, one personal win and one professional win over the last 7 days. And I know when we started it about a year and a half ago with our team, there was a couple of, leaders that were a little bit reluctant. They're like, wow, what's this about? But now, when we start the meeting, boy, we jump right into it, share, talk. And what's been really interesting, I've worked with some of these guys for 7-8 years. I'm hearing things that I never knew about them when they're sharing one personal thing. I find that fascinating, which has helped me be a better leader also, because now I know more about them that I never thought of asking or even learning about, and I could talk to them about beside day-to-day work initiatives. So I really like that asking approach and just sitting there listening as opposed to always going in with the answer. Have you seen any organizations that are really getting good at sort of, scaling this human experience management, or are there any sort of pieces you've been seeing in organizations that have been doing a really good job at scaling it in any way, or ideas or suggestions you could put out that, people could point to and say, these guys are getting there. They're more mature, or they're ahead of the curve than a lot of organizations?
There are organizations like I think that, Delta, surprisingly enough, over the years has done a really good job asking and involving the employees in some of the changes that they've made over time. So one of the things I'm a constant researcher, right? I like forest days. It's in my blood. I don't feel like I was born a researcher, but I'm always like trying to figure out. One of the things I always do on plane rides, and I do it in other places too, but certainly on plane, I always ask the staff, from the people who check me in to the flight attendants to, if I happen to see a pilot on the way in or the way out, what's it like working for, Delta, American, JetBlue, or whatever it is? The change in responses from Delta over the years has been unbelievable, right? 8 years ago, they were all the same. Everyone hated, they might say different things, but you could read in their face that they hated their company. They might like their work, right? I like doing this thing, but boy, I wish I didn't have to do it for them. Um, Change came over with Delta, and I think a lot of that had to do with the involvement and the attitude towards the people, right? And we're back to sort of sharing of successes. When people are involved and people feel like you're listening to them, right? Then they will exert more energy. And it's sort of this weird thing, right? Like people have a lot of human capacity. People have more so even the people that say they're overworked are not really overworked in general. What they're talking about is that the capacity and energy that I can give to this thing based on all the stuff around me does not match the things that I think I'm supposed to be doing here, right? So there's a mismatch. But you create human capacity if people are energized, if people feel like they're a part of it, then you have two great things that come together. The first thing is they have a much better view on what's important and where and how they should be adding value, which allows them to be more efficient in their use of time and energy, right? So, and it's not just, it's energy too, right? Because if you are concerned or mulling or you feel stressed,
Yeah.
that takes away your
Oh,
capacity,
yeah. You're
right?
indecisive, you're slow to act,
Yeah.
all those things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you have that happening. At the same time, you have energy and a willingness to spend more of your capacity on the thing, right? So you actually generate more capacity. You end up having a willingness to spend more of that capacity at the job you have. And this is what's crazy to me, right? Which is we go back to the HR discussion. If HR leaders saw themselves as being responsible for maybe the most important asset that an organization has, which is the capability and capacity of its employees, right? If that was an asset, they should be spending a lot of money, time, and energy in figuring out how do we get a much better return on that asset, as opposed to how do we make sure that we administratively get everyone who needs to be in a training in a training? How do we make sure that we're rolling out sort of the review process in a standard way all the time, every place? So anyway, go full circle on that story.
And it's something we do with organization, but we struggle with is, often we position the work we're doing. Yes, we're doing a survey, and yes, you're going to get metrics and dashboards and all that. But the real value is creating. It's really we call it a catalyst for dialogue, and the real value then comes out of what we call you're releasing or unleashing the untapped potential in every employee's head. The idea that your employees are walking around with a lot of human capital locked up in their head, a lot of ideas, a lot of suggestions. But the goal is to release that and to release that in a way that drives the business forward. And I tend to agree with you. There's a lot of energy, a lot of value built up in those heads of people walking around, and they walk out the door every day with that asset, and you want them to come back. But not only that, you want to figure out a way to get it out of them. And that's a real challenge for leaders, particularly as leadership is changing from a telling, doing to more of a coaching, supporting, listening, asking, and what, as you talked about, all the uncertainty and change in the world, leaders don't know the answers, or they can't guess what the road's going to look like in 6 months, 9 months, 3 months down, or 3 years down the road. So it's something that is a challenge, and I'm glad you're teaching this stuff, because it is something that I deeply believe we really haven't figured out how to tap into, because there is a lot of built up assets in those brains, and we got to unleash that.
Well, let me give you because we're on the topic. Let me give you one more piece of advice for any leaders who are listening. That because you frame, and by the way, I love the way you frame sort of the untapped capacity and of people. As you mentioned, the world in which people and leaders lead is certainly more complex and going to be more uncertain in the future. And one of the things you could, a ritual that I want to teach leaders to do is to not feel like if they don't know, if they're in a complex situation, it is okay to share the complexity with the people around you. You don't shut up. You share the things that you're struggling with the people around you. Because what that does, they feel it too, right? So they now feel like, okay, I do understand what's going on. They confirm that those people have better understanding. And then they also can interpret what you do in a much cleaner way, right? Because it might be like if I'm uncertain about this, but I make this decision, that decision doesn't make any sense on its own, but it might make sense if it's along with, I'm uncertain about this, but I think given this and this might be our best option right now, as opposed to we're going to do this, right? So sharing your thinking allows people around you to not only trust you better, but also align with you the way you make decisions in the future. So anyway, back to you.
I know the survey feedback we get, that's one of the most common ones, is people want to know not just the decision, but the reasoning behind the decision. The challenge, though, is I think for some leaders, and well, why wouldn't they do this? Is it because possibly it sort of makes them feel vulnerable? It's like, well, I should know all of this stuff, and I'm here to make those, tough decisions, and I'm making them in the right way. And often leaders aren't. They might look like they're confident with their decision, but often they're not. They're not. They're just like, boy, that's the least foggy direction that I can see, but everything's really foggy, but this is the way we're going. But maybe they're afraid to share some of that, uncertainty and vulnerability they feel around making these decisions.
This is where there's sort of there always is tension points. One of the tension points is I believe that vulnerability is a key aspect of leadership, right? Leaders need to have vulnerability. However, if you look at who succeeds at the most highest levels of leadership, whether it's partnerships in a legal firm, the top partners in a legal firm, the CEO, they tend to be the people that don't share the vulnerability. So like it's almost like if you want to be a successful leader, vulnerability is important and valuable. If you want to be the top of the stack of leaders, but only a few people make it there, right? A very few people make it there. But if you want to take that shot, of a tiny shot that you'll be the best of the best in the top of the world, then maybe don't show your vulnerability.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it in that way. I like it. I like it. I'm going to change the direction here a little bit. I want you to think a little bit about the future, particularly with the evolution of tech, and then of course, AI. And it seems every week, if not every day, there's like a new model and new change. And I was just reading about there was an article today. Sam Altman talked about, already AI's, smarter than, humans. He's talking about it's outpaced human intelligence. So it just, if you think about experience management in that context, where do you think it's going? Like, how do you see AI and technology, but probably AI mostly, shaping sort of experience management, your employee experience management from your experience and perspective over so many decades of doing this type of work?
Well, I think that to me, the question is less, when I think about technology, is less about what is it going to do to employee experience and more about what is it going to do to employees. And I had a great podcast, hasn't been published yet, with Faisal Hawk, who's a great mind around AI. And one of the things he talked about was the notion that all work is hybrid work. And so hybrid work is not like hybrid we think about, not in the office and out of the office hybrid, but every job is going to be a human with some AI attached around or connected with them, right? So that's the first thing I would say, which is we need to think about a world where not whether it's human versus AI, but where AI is a productive supporter of all human activity. And if that's the case, then if we talk about employee experience, then if we think about the future of our workforce is going to have to be comfortable and clear about using AI in the tools around it. So one of the things we have to think about is how do we prepare them for that, right? How do we do that? And how do we get the organization helping us design the systems that make them better at what they do with AI? Because clearly AI is going to displace some roles, but at the end of the day, it's also going to make other roles available for people to work at a higher level. And if we can get our workforce to get to that higher level faster, then not only will they be happier with us, right? Because they'll be more fulfilled, but we should have an advantage in the market. So if I go back to like some of the fundamentals of just basic, what does it do to experience management the way we think about it today? We talked about the fact about taking action on insights
And the challenges there.
and the challenges of it, right? One of the problems we have today with customer experience, employee experience with data is data ends up generally in charts and dashboards, and people don't think about their decisions in terms of charts and dashboards. If I'm a frontline manager in the contact center, great, I go look at a bunch of stats about what's one employee doing, what's another employee doing. I have to interpret that, right? But what AI can do is can hopefully sort through the data and answer the question that I really have. I have 10 minutes now. Which employee should I use that 10 minutes with? What topic should I use? And what outcomes should I try and get? And how should I approach it with them? Like, that is useful data and insights for me. I could, if I had 10 minutes, I might spend the entire 10 minutes looking at my dashboard and end up realizing I lost all, couldn't figure out what to do with it. So I lost the 10 minutes I had. I'm not going to talk to any of my employees.
Yeah, I like that. Using AI to give them almost a next step, or here's something to do, or try this. Because it is hard for managers when they come there, they come into this, look at this data, their mind is full of all kinds of operational stuff they've been dealing with, all pieces of the work that isn't necessary. And then they've got to absorb this on a blank sheet and also, okay, now what do I do? What's it mean? How do I use it? What's an action I can take? And then they're back out in the field again, dealing with sort of that day-to-day stuff that they get pinged on from employees to leaders, to managers, to customers. So that using AI to give them that, almost like a suggested prescription. And I think it could do that very well.
I always think about workflows. People have jobs and they're doing stuff, and the organization has stuff happening and going on. And the more we have people step out of that to try and look at data and then figure out how to step back into it, it's difficult. So I think the ultimate is to get insights embedded in those workflows, right? So it's just a natural step of what I'm doing, and not have people remove themselves from a workflow to go then use data and try and sort through it.
Separated, yeah, to build it right in. Just out of curiosity, what do you, I've seen and even talked to different workforces and got feedback and read stuff. Some employees seem to be really embracing and looking forward to AI, where you hear sometimes stories that there's a lot of fear and then there's a lot of uncertainty around it. But it's not a consistent message, I guess I'm hearing. Are you hearing the same thing, or what are you seeing in terms of how people are generally thinking about AI and maybe the average employee or the average manager? Now, executives are in a different world. I agree. They're not worried. Well, they're worried about their company, but I don't think they're worried about themselves as much. Where someone who's, living day to day or paycheck to paycheck, it's a different story.
Yeah, I think that the employees mirror sort of with the expert. You hear some experts say we don't need people at all, right? We'll get rid of people. Like, Zuckerberg, he just announced that they're going to have completely self-service marketing campaigns on the Meta platform. All you do is share some pictures of your product, some objectives, and how much money you want to spend, and it does the whole ad agency thing from there to scratch, right? From there on, right? So there's some people and then there are other people who say, no, AI will be used to create more fulfilling and more powerful things that human beings do. So I think there's no way that employees would have a more insightful and concise view than the contrary views that all the experts have, right? So it's fair to say I don't know, or I'm afraid, or I'm scared. But one of the things I will say, and this was in a recent conversation I had, which was eye-opening to me, which is there are fields where we know that AI is going to sort of eliminate a lot of the entry level things, right? Lawyers. You don't need a bunch of lawyers looking through data and all like that. Even doctors, right? Diagnostics so if we have fields where AI, even in advertising, if we have fields where AI is eliminating some of the entry level positions, then there's a secondary thing we have to worry about, which is we're never going to get the more experienced people because we've actually removed the pipeline of experiential learning of those people because we've eliminated the jobs in which they learn to be the experts. That's sort of some of the things that I think we have to be thinking about that are not as obvious as are we going to have no employees, or are we going to have just lots of employees doing other things with AI?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah. And that whole thing came up not only I think in AI, but just in remote work now too, with new employees coming on board. It's, if everyone's still working at home, they don't have that opportunity to sit and just watch how things happen in an organization. All those cultural cues that aren't necessarily written down or talked about or explicit all the time, but you pick up intuitively as a human as how to act, how to behave in an organization. We're missing that for a lot of new employees. So they don't have that learning curve that a lot of other organizations had, or we had pre-COVID. One question: if you're stepping into a mid-sized organization, you're either the CEO or CHRO, what's the first thing you would do to better, understand employees, better listen to and understand employees?
I would go out, I would have a listening tour. I would do lunch and learns with like 5 or 6 people every day for the first 30 days.
What's one small, consistent habit that helped you, sort of become more human-centric? So you're trying to teach managers to think more and put themselves in their staff shoes. What's one thing you've learned as personally to do in terms of putting yourself in other people's shoes?
I'm analytical, right? So I very quickly get to like answers that I think are right, and can make very quick judgments. So one of the things I've learned is just to pause. For me, it's the act of pausing. We go back to sort of the notion of cognitive behavioral therapy. I pause, and that gives me an opportunity to think, is my natural reaction the one that I really want to go forward with, or do I want to do something different?
Interesting. Good. I like that. Yeah. Just take a breath, take a pause, and before you jump in with the answer or that you think is the answer. And finally, what's sort of one mind shift or simple action you hope our listeners to take away back to their teams after hearing this episode? What's one thing you'd like, and particularly if you think about a middle manager, what's one thing you'd like them to take back?
Yeah, I'd like them to think that, look around them and understand what makes those people proud of the work that they do. If you can't come up with that, figure out, how do you find a way to make them proud of the work that they're doing? Life's too short, and people spend too much time at work not to be proud of what they're doing. And that's a good challenge for any leader, is find a way to make people proud. And I think if you're doing that, you're probably mirroring the right types of leadership behaviors that you need.
Oh, that's great. Well, Bruce, I very much thank you for your time. There's been some excellent insights throughout this session, and we look forward to hearing more of your upcoming podcasts on humanity at scale. Thank you, Bruce.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Voice Activated. If you've heard something that got you thinking, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Talk about it, put it into play. That's how better workplaces get built. When you're ready to move from insight into action, head over to TalentMap.com. You'll find tools, resources, and strategies to help you lead better with clarity, empathy, and impact. And make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any more real conversations with leaders who know that some of the best ideas for change don't come from the top, but from those employees closest to the work.